As you step onto the estate, the ground itself seems to shift in tone, almost as if it recognizes that another visitor has crossed the threshold of a kingdom hidden in plain sight. The ascent begins gently, along paths shaped by generations of gardeners who never appeared in portraits yet define the first impression of this extraordinary place. Italian terraces unfold ahead in a sequence so deliberate, so quietly theatrical, that they reveal their intention long before the house comes into view. These terraces were not built for aristocratic strolls alone. They serve as the estate's opening act, guiding the eye, slowing the breath, preparing the visitor for something older, deeper, and far more strategic than a simple country residence. The planting is lush yet disciplined, the hedges trimmed into geometric precision, while borders overflow with seasonal color. It is an intentional contrast, nature softened into elegance, but never stripped of vitality. The stone balustrades, carved urns, and long staircases descending through the garden echo the grandeur of forgotten Italian villas, creating a sense that time has layered itself here rather than past. Sunlight moves differently across these surfaces, catching the honeyed tones of the local stone, and giving everything a warmth that belies how formidable this estate truly is. From the terraces, the land stretches outward in every direction, and only then does the scale of the estate become clear. Thousands of acres of fields, forests, and tenant farms form a domain so vast that most of it lies beyond the viewer's immediate perception. What you see is only the curated edge of an operation that has never relied on loud declarations of status. Instead, Englefield House has cultivated an image of serene permanence, allowing its quiet influence to grow through centuries of calculated stewardship. The terraces invite admiration, but they also distract from the sheer magnitude of the power radiating from the estate behind them. When the house finally rises into view, it does so with the confidence of a place that has witnessed every shift of English history, from monarchs and ministers to soldiers, merchants, and modern magnates. The Elizabethan façade presents tall, mullioned windows set into warm, golden stone, each reflecting layers of architectural ambition, shaped by changing generations. Gables and chimneys outline a silhouette that appears almost theatrical against the sky, though nothing about it is exaggerated. Englefield House has no need for ornamentation to assert importance. Its true weight comes from endurance. As you move closer, the house reveals a subtle paradox. It exudes tranquility, as though it has achieved a state of effortless permanence. Yet beneath this calm lies the machinery of a vast rural empire. Land, forestry, farming, real estate holdings, an entire economic system radiates from the position of this single structure, just as it has for centuries. Even the gardens contribute to the estate's operations, drawing visitors whose modest admission fees quietly sustain heritage preservation on a scale few imagine. But standing on the terrace, looking up at the long windows and the stones that have weathered storms, regimes, and revolutions, it becomes clear that the house does something more. It conceals its strength behind beauty, hiding centuries of enterprise and influence beneath an exterior that appears content simply to exist. This calm facade is camouflage, a mask worn by an estate that has mastered the art of seeming ancient and unchanging while constantly adapting to survive. The path now narrows as it leads toward the main entrance. The sounds of the gardens soften, replaced by the steady echo of footsteps against stone. The threshold is only a few steps away, but it feels like crossing into a different era entirely. Everything outside has prepared the visitor for this moment. The terraces, the sunlight on the stone, the deliberate sequence of spaces that act as a prologue to the story engraved in the walls beyond. Ahead lies the long gallery, the drawing rooms, the libraries, and the layers of history embedded in each corridor. And with the first step inside, the house begins to reveal the truth it has guarded for 1,000 years, how this quiet estate became a fortress of continuity, shaped by conflict, ambition, reinvention, and the relentless will of the families who claimed it. The quiet grandeur of the house lingers behind as the landscape begins to shift, drawing the mind back through centuries to a time when this serene ground looked nothing like the manicured terraces of today. Long before stone walls rose here, the land was a battleground, an exposed stretch where shields clashed and the air shook with the force of two worlds colliding. the soil beneath the estate still holds the memory of that distant confrontation, a moment when Saxon warriors stood against Viking forces in a struggle that shaped the destiny of early England. The calm you see now did not emerge naturally. It was earned through conflict that echoed far beyond the battlefield. The fields that surround the house once bore the weight of fighters who understood that this territory was more than just a strategic location. It was a gateway into the heartland of Wessex, a crucial point that determined power, survival, and the future of a kingdom. A Danish leader fell here, and with him the momentum of a northern advance, though the broader conflict surged on. What matters is that this land became marked, not by monuments or inscriptions, but by memory itself. Generations that followed recognized its significance long before any structure appeared. Even centuries later, the atmosphere carries that faint resonance of something ancient, unresolved and deeply formative. As the violence of that era receded and England shifted away from the chaos of invasions, the land began to reorganize under new systems of allegiance and governance. The battlefield slowly turned into territory worth claiming, cultivating, and defending through different kinds of power. Families aligned with emerging rulers began taking responsibility for wide stretches of countryside, and among them was a lineage destined to anchor itself to this ground so firmly that it would give its name to the place itself. From early records emerges the figure of Gade Englefield, a man whose position within the changing social order allowed him to hold influence at a time when England was reshaping itself. It is here, on this former battleground, that his family secured its presence not through conquest, but through recognition and integration into the new feudal landscape. As the foundations of medieval England took form, the Englefields established control, transforming rugged land into the beginnings of an estate that would soon rise in prominence. With each passing generation, their ties to the property strengthened. The name Englefield began to appear in documents connected to governance, responsibility, and loyalty to the crown. The estate was no longer simply a parcel of land. It had become a place with lineage, identity, and an emerging architectural future. The shift from open field to ancestral domain was gradual but inevitable, as though the land itself had been waiting for a family to root itself deeply enough to withstand the turbulence of the centuries ahead. The early Englefield presence did not yet resemble the house known today, but it laid the cultural and symbolic groundwork on which everything else would be built. What had once been a site of conflict became a seat of authority, and the family's growing role in national life meant that the estate would soon evolve far beyond its modest beginnings. The origins of the future house, its stability, its influence, its endurance, begin right here in the transformation of a blood-marked field into a center of emerging power. And as the medieval world matured and England moved toward the age of monarchs, councils, and new political structures, the family that held this land stepped steadily from local prominence into national significance, carrying the estate with them toward its next monumental chapter. The transformation from battlefield to estate unfolded gradually, as though the land itself needed time to shed the echoes of conflict before accepting walls, hearths, and a new kind of permanence. What emerged first was not the grand Elizabethan structure seen today, but a far simpler manner, functional, fortified in spirit if not in design, and built with the quiet determination of a family intent on securing its future. The early Englefields were not yet figures of national authority, but they possessed something just as valuable, an instinct for survival and a sense of belonging to this particular stretch of Berkshire soil. Their house, modest by later standards, became the nucleus around which a sprawling estate would eventually grow. It overlooked fields that had once witnessed chaos, fields they now plowed, fenced, and claimed through steady labor rather than force. The manor acted as a beacon of emerging stability, in a region still adjusting to new systems of governance. With each successive generation, the Englefields intertwined their identity with the estate, reinforcing the idea that the land and the family were inseparable. Documents from the medieval period show their rising involvement in regional duties, indicating that the house was already more than a residence. It was a local institution with responsibilities that extended beyond its walls. As political structures evolved across England, the Englefield estate grew in both material and symbolic weight. By the late medieval era, the family had gained enough stature to participate actively in national affairs, and the house reflected this change. It was expanded in stages, each addition reinforcing the idea that this was no longer just a manor farm, but the seat of a family climbing steadily toward influence. The architecture, though still rooted in practicality, began adopting stylistic features that signaled aspiration: wider halls, more prominent windows, and the beginnings of the symmetrical layouts that would later become hallmarks of English gentry homes. The true turning point arrived as England moved toward the Tudor period. Power was consolidating, governance restructuring, and families with long-established roots were positioned to rise quickly if they aligned themselves properly. The Englefields understood the shift and adapted with remarkable precision. Their home became a backdrop for their increasing political engagement, a place where decisions were shaped, alliances formed, and reputations forged. The family's service in royal courts elevated their national standing, and the estate, still evolving architecturally, transformed into a material symbol of that ascent. With the appointment of Sir Thomas Englefield as Speaker of the House of Commons at the turn of the 16th century, the estate moved definitively into the realm of political power. The house now represented not just family honor, but institutional authority. Visitors arrived expecting a residence that reflected the dignity of its owners, and in response, the Englefields expanded and refined the structure. Though the building that stands today would not fully emerge until later centuries, the DNA of the great house began to take shape in this era. Ambition expressed through architecture, status communicated through scale, and position fortified by the very walls that sheltered its most influential inhabitants. The house grew into a statement, one that announced the family's place within the Tudor order. By the time England entered an age of religious struggle, royal intrigue, and shifting loyalties, Englefield House had already become more than a private dwelling. It was a political tool, a marker of authority, and a tangible demonstration of the family's ascent. And just as the Tudor world grew more volatile, the estate found itself entangled in the storm that would determine its future. The rise of the Englefields into national prominence brought with it new responsibilities, new expectations, and, inevitably, new dangers. By the mid-16th century, England had entered a volatile age in which religious loyalty was no longer a private matter, but a political declaration with profound consequences. Against this backdrop, Englefield House became more than a family estate. It evolved into a discrete headquarters where ideology, strategy, and resistance intertwined. Its serene exterior concealed conversations that could reshape lives, alliances, and even the direction of the kingdom. Sir Francis Englefield inherited not only the family estate, but also the weight of a deeply rooted Catholic identity at a time when England's religious landscape was in violent upheaval. To him, Englefield House was not merely a comfortable home or a symbol of heritage. It was a place from which he could support a vision of the kingdom aligned with the old faith. He gathered around him counselors, priests, messengers, and loyalists who shared both conviction and caution. Within the thick stone walls, behind doors meant to shut out the shifting winds of political favor, discussions unfolded that required absolute discretion. The estate's isolation, so advantageous for agricultural management, became equally valuable as a sanctuary for those who preferred to think and speak away from the ears of the new establishment. Under Queen Mary I, Francis's loyalty to Catholicism was not a liability, but an asset. His service in her administration elevated him, granting both influence and access. Englefield House swelled with the momentum of his career, acting as a center for planning, correspondence, and the careful orchestration of duties that connected local authority with national governance. The estate thrived, its prestige mirroring the fortunes of its owner. Rooms once reserved for quiet domestic life now hosted discussions about property management, regional oversight, and matters that reached far beyond Berkshire's boundaries. But when the throne passed to Elizabeth I, the tectonic plates beneath the kingdom shifted with startling speed. Catholic officials who had been valued partners of the crown suddenly found themselves out of alignment with the new political reality. For Sir Francis, Englefield House became a shelter rather than a showcase, a defensive outpost where he attempted to maintain dignity while the tide turned sharply against him. He continued to correspond with fellow Catholics, to advise from the shadows, and to hold firmly to the principles that had defined his public life. In doing so, he crossed an invisible threshold into the realm of suspicion. The house, once an emblem of political legitimacy, began to draw unwanted scrutiny. Letters arrived with questions that had no safe answers. Riders passed through the estate gates with orders that hinted at investigation or warning. Servants who once took pride in the stability of their household sensed a tension they had never witnessed before. Within the estate's long gallery, in rooms lined with family portraits and symbols of heritage, Francis weighed decisions that would determine the fate not only of his own life, but of the home that carried his name. When evidence surfaced linking him to Catholic networks abroad, networks concerned not only with worship, but with the possible restoration of a Catholic monarch, his position became untenable. The quiet estate in Berkshire was no longer a place where ideas were exchanged discreetly. It was now implicated by association with a movement viewed by the Crown as a threat. Francis retreated across the Channel, choosing exile over confrontation. But Englefield House could not follow him. His departure did not remove suspicion, it confirmed it. The estate, once the pride of a rising family, became a symbol of alleged disloyalty. Legal proceedings followed, and with them the irreversible decision that severed the Englefields from the place they had shaped for centuries. Confiscation was more than punishment. It was a statement from the Crown that loyalty to the state overrode lineage, tradition, and the memory of service. The house shifted hands, passing into the possession of those whose allegiance matched the ruling order. The Englefield name, once so firmly tied to this land, faded from its front gates. Standing today, the house offers no visible trace of that turbulent chapter. No plaque, no inscription, no architectural scar. Yet the silence of the estate carries the echo of a moment when ideology proved more powerful than inheritance, and when a family's legacy fractured beneath the weight of national transformation. Englefield House survived, but the Englefields themselves slipped from its story, leaving the stage open for the arrival of new owners who would carry the estate into its next era. The confiscation of Englefield House marked a turning point not only for the estate, but for the very idea of what a great house could represent in the political machinery of England. Once a sanctuary shaped by centuries of Englefield presence, the estate was stripped from its lineage with the cold efficiency of a monarch determined to assert authority. Elizabeth of the Fawn understood the symbolic weight of such an action. Removing the estate from a family associated with the old faith was not simply a legal measure, it was a declaration that loyalty, not heritage, would determine who was permitted to prosper in her England. In this period, Englefield House ceased to be a private refuge and instead became a public instrument of power. Its seizure sent a message to families across the kingdom. Influence could be revoked as swiftly as it was earned. By transferring the estate to her spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, the Queen displayed both strategic foresight and political theater. Walsingham, known for his intricate intelligence networks and relentless pursuit of threats against the Crown, represented absolute loyalty to the new order. Placing Englefield House under his control reinforced the idea that the tools of governance extended far beyond documents, courts, and speeches. Real estate, especially property with legacy and history, could be wielded as a silent but potent weapon. For the estate itself, the change in ownership meant a period of transition. The house, though stripped from its original family, did not lose its dignity. The architecture still carried echoes of earlier ambitions, even as servants adjusted to a household reorganized around new priorities. The shift from Englefield stewardship to Walsingham's oversight represented more than a transfer of property. It was a repurposing of the estate's very identity. Instead of a Catholic stronghold, it became part of the apparatus supporting the Protestant state, a secure and valuable asset entrusted to the Crown's most perceptive guardian. Yet Walsingham's relationship to the house was markedly different from that of the Englefields, where the family had poured generations of attention into the land, cultivating it as an extension of their own story. Walsingham viewed the estate with the pragmatism of a statesman whose duties did not allow for sentimental attachment. Englefield House became one thread in a vast web of responsibilities, useful, respected, but not loved in the way an ancestral home is loved. Decisions regarding the estate were made with a focus on political and administrative necessity rather than emotional continuity. As a result, the house entered a quieter, more restrained chapter, one marked by practical upkeep rather than passionate investment. When Walsingham's tenure ended, Englefield House once again found itself at the mercy of changing political currents. A series of short-lived occupants passed through its rooms, each leaving only faint impressions on the long timeline of the estate. Some stayed briefly, others long enough to make modest adjustments or oversee routine maintenance, but none forged a bond strong enough to steer the estate into a new era. These transitional years left the house in a curious state, neither neglected nor truly cherished, standing firm yet subtly hollowed by the absence of a family that regarded it as the heart of their identity. It was during this unsettled period that Englefield House faced yet another shift in ownership, the arrival of John Paulet, the 5th Marquess of Winchester. His life, marked by dramatic allegiance and hardship, brought a different kind of energy to the estate. Known for his defiant stand during the English Civil War, he sought refuge at Englefield, after enduring the devastation of siege and the collapse of royalist fortunes. Though he arrived wounded in reputation and resources, his presence restored a measure of aristocratic gravity to the house. He treated the estate not merely as a dwelling, but as a place of recovery, a sanctuary where he could anchor himself after witnessing the splintering of the political world he had once defended. But even with his arrival, the estate remained suspended between eras. The grandeur of its origins persisted, but the house felt the accumulated weight of confiscation, shifting loyalties, and decades of instability. It had become, in effect, a quiet survivor of political storms, weathering each transformation with the heavy poise of a structure that understood its own endurance. The land, the stone, the terraces, everything stood ready for the moment when a new lineage would reclaim not just the property, but the sense of purpose the house had once known. That moment was approaching, ushering Englefield House toward a union that would change its fate once more and introduce a family whose global connections and growing prosperity would restore vitality to the estate, setting the stage for the next reinvention of a house that refused to fade. The turbulence of the 17th century swept across England with a force that reached even the most secluded estates, and Englefield House, though distant from the direct lines of battle, found itself drawn into the drama through the fate of one man. John Paulet, the 5th Marquess of Winchester, arrived not as a triumphant aristocrat, but as a survivor of a siege so brutal that it became a symbol of royalist defiance. His ancestral stronghold, Basing House, had endured repeated assaults from parliamentary forces until resistance became impossible. When it fell, the Marquess carried with him not only the weight of personal loss, but the collapse of a world he had fought to defend. Englefield House received him in a moment when both estate and owner faced uncertain futures. Though not fortified in stone, the house became a refuge in spirit, a place where a fallen loyalist could retreat from the chaos, gather his strength, and adjust to a new reality shaped by the ascendancy of his opponents. The fields surrounding the estate, once marked by ancient battles of long-forgotten ages, now bore witness to a quieter conflict, the struggle of a man attempting to reconcile honor with survival. Within the walls of Englefield House, the Marquess found temporary stability. His presence carried the inadvertent symbolism of transforming the estate into a kind of moral stronghold. It was here that he regrouped, wrote letters, and navigated the delicate politics of post-war England. Though the house did not face cannon fire or the fury of troops, it absorbed the tension of the wider conflict through the decisions made under its roof. Each room seemed to carry echoes of discussions about land, loyalty, and the uncertain direction of the restored monarchy. For the estate, this period was less about physical transformation and more about the intangible shift in how the house was perceived, a sanctuary during upheaval, a quiet witness to the fading of old allegiances. Yet refuge alone could not halt the march of time. The Marquess's resources, already depleted by war, were limited. The estate could shelter him, but it could not restore the vast fortune he once commanded. His residence at Englefield marked the closing of a powerful chapter in aristocratic history. When he passed and the property moved into the hands of his descendants, the momentum that had traditionally defined the Paulet family had weakened. The estate was stable but adrift, waiting for the arrival of new leadership capable of guiding it into a different future. As the 18th century approached, England itself began to shift away from the rigid hierarchies that had defined earlier centuries. Opportunities arose not only through nobility, but through global trade, expanding empires, and the rapid growth of wealth made far beyond English borders. It was within this context that the estate once again found itself at a crossroads. The remnants of the Paulet legacy offered continuity, but not expansion, dignity, but not renewal. Englefield House needed more than a caretaker. It needed a dynasty willing to invest, innovate, and build upon the foundation left by centuries of change. The transition came through marriage, uniting the estate with a family whose fortunes had been forged not through English soil alone, but through the far-reaching networks of a global trade empire. This new connection would reshape the destiny of Englefield House, infusing it with financial strength and a fresh architectural vision. As the property shifted into the hands of owners prepared to imprint their own identity upon it, the house stood poised for reinvention, ready to emerge not merely as a refuge from war, but as the centerpiece of a renewed and ambitious chapter. The gradual fading of the Paulet era left Englefield House in a state of dignified limbo, still impressive, still historically anchored, but without a guiding force strong enough to shape its next century. It was a house waiting for direction, a great structure whose walls held stories, but whose future felt suspended. The turning point arrived not through conquest or political appointment, but through a marriage contract, one of those quiet unions that, in retrospect, alters the trajectory of entire estates. When Mary Tyson, heiress to Englefield's remaining line of descent, married Powlett Wright, the alliance at first appeared to be a conventional consolidation of property. Yet beneath the formalities lay the earliest signs of revival, the first hints that the estate might once again find a family willing to treat it as a living legacy rather than inherited responsibility. Powlett Wright approached the estate with the sensibility of a man who respected tradition, but recognized the need for modernization. Under his care, Englefield House began to escape the stagnation that had settled upon it. He introduced refinements aligned with the Georgian ideals of comfort and proportion, softening earlier architectural elements that had grown outdated. Though these adjustments were not revolutionary, they represented the first genuine investment the house had seen in decades, an acknowledgement that the estate required attention if it was to remain relevant in a rapidly changing England. The gardens were tended with renewed purpose, the interiors reorganized, and the estate's finances brought into steadier balance. But even Wright's efforts were only a prelude to the transformation to come. After his time, the estate passed through another inheritance within the Wright lineage, continuing its steady, careful evolution. Yet it still lacked the force of vision and resources strong enough to propel it into a new architectural era. What Englefield House needed was someone with not only wealth, but imagination, someone whose perspective extended far beyond Berkshire's borders, someone who understood the power of reinvention on a grand scale. That individual arrived through Mary's second marriage in 1745, when she united her estate with Richard Benyon, a man whose fortune and worldview had been shaped thousands of miles from England. Benyon's ascent from orphaned clerk to governor of Fort St. George in Madras placed him among a new wave of British elites whose wealth came not from ancestral lands, but from the expanding reach of the East India Company. His experience navigating global trade, commanding operations abroad, and managing vast colonial enterprises gave him a perspective far removed from the insular traditions of English country estates. His arrival at Englefield House marked the beginning of a new lineage, one that would shape the estate more decisively than any family before it. Benyon did not view the property as a static relic. To him, it was a canvas, an opportunity to fuse old-world heritage with fresh influences acquired through years of exposure to distant cultures. He possessed the financial power to restore the house's fading grandeur and the ambition to elevate it beyond anything previously imagined. The marriage settlement ensured that the estate would be preserved within the family for generations, providing long-term stability that had eluded earlier owners. With Richard Benyon's entry into its story, Englefield House gained more than a new master. It gained a future. His wealth offered the means to reimagine the estate, but his global sensibilities provided the inspiration needed to transform it into something architecturally and culturally richer. Fine Anglo-Indian furnishings traveled with him, their craftsmanship introducing new textures and aesthetics into English interiors. They were early hints of the broader transformation that would eventually shape the house into the Victorian showpiece it would become. The marriage did more than preserve Englefield House. It laid the groundwork for its rebirth. Under the Benyon name, the estate would soon enter a period of ambitious reinvention, marked by sweeping architectural projects, dramatic landscaping, and a renewed sense of identity. And at the center of this evolution stood Richard Benyon himself, a man whose arrival would trigger the most defining chapter in the estate's history. Richard Benyon arrived in England carrying a fortune that had been accumulated not through ancestral rents or inherited privilege, but through years of navigating the complex, often unforgiving world of colonial administration. As governor of Fort St. George in Madras, he had managed one of the East India Company's most strategically important outposts, a place where trade, diplomacy, and political maneuvering intertwined on a scale unimaginable to most English landowners of his time. His responsibilities had ranged from overseeing merchants and military officers to negotiating with regional powers whose influence extended far beyond the walls of the British settlement. The wealth he returned with was not merely financial. It was experiential, shaped by exposure to cultures, artistry, and administrative systems radically different from those of Europe. When he entered Englefield House as its new master, he brought with him both capital and perspective, and these two forces would become inseparable in redefining the estate's destiny. The financial resources he commanded exceeded anything the property had seen in generations. Decades of careful but limited stewardship had preserved the estate, but left it without the means to expand, innovate, or adapt. Suddenly, Englefield House had access to funds capable of supporting not just maintenance but transformation, a level of investment that could reimagine the estate's architecture, reclaim its position among the great country houses, and prepare it for a rapidly changing world. Benyon's time in India left visible traces in the objects he transported back to England: furniture crafted from richly grained teak, cabinets inlaid with ivory, writing tables embellished with intricate carvings. These items, more than personal possessions, represented an aesthetic conversation between continents. Within the walls of Englefield House, they introduced textures and forms unfamiliar to traditional English interiors. Polished ivory gleamed beneath soft candlelight, dark woods contrasted with pale plaster, and the precision of Indian craftsmanship offered a glimpse into a world that few English viewers would ever encounter directly. Though these pieces were scattered throughout the estate, they served as early signals of a broader shift, a quiet preview of the cultural and architectural blending that would soon define the house's evolution. More importantly, the wealth behind these objects enabled Benyon to envision Englefield House not as something to be preserved in its current state, but as a structure worthy of reinvention. For centuries, English country houses had grown in response to the rhythms of inheritance, with each generation adding a wing here or expanding a garden there. But Benyon approached the estate with the ambition of someone accustomed to shaping large, complex systems. He saw potential where others had seen limitations, recognizing that the house could embody both its long heritage and a new modern grandeur. The estate's income from agriculture and tenant properties provided stability, but it was Benyon's overseas fortune that unlocked the possibility of a comprehensive redesign. His marriage to Mary Tyson had secured the legal continuity of the estate, but it was his vision that gave Englefield its new trajectory. Under his guidance, the family began consolidating land, refining operations, and preparing for architectural projects that would unfold long after his tenure. His descendants would expand upon his foundations, but the shift in mindset, seeing the house as something capable of achieving greatness on a Victorian scale, originated with him. The estate was no longer simply surviving, it was gathering momentum. As the 18th century deepened, Benyon's influence rippled through every aspect of the property. Networks developed during his time in India granted him not only wealth, but social connections that elevated the family within the rising class of globally informed English elites. Englefield House, once vulnerable and overshadowed, now stood on the edge of revival. The resources were in place, the ambition established, and the family poised for the architectural renaissance that would redefine the estate for centuries to come. The stage was set. What had begun with Eastern riches and a governor's return would soon unfold into one of the most dramatic transformations in the estate's history, a reinvention that would reshape Englefield House into the Victorian masterpiece that endures today. The momentum ignited by Richard Benion's return from India carried forward into the next century, gaining strength as England transitioned into the Victorian era, a period defined by confidence, technological ambition, and a desire to fuse historical reverence with modern comfort. Englefield House, already enriched with resources and global influences, was now primed for the most sweeping architectural reinvention in its long history. What had once been a modest Elizabethan manor, adapted gradually across generations, was about to be reshaped into a statement of Victorian grandeur. The first decisive step came in the 1820s, when Thomas Hopper, an architect favored by King George IV, was invited to update the estate. Hopper was known for an unusual versatility. He could move effortlessly between Gothic Revival designs and classical Grecian forms, blending eras with a sensitivity that suited Englefield's layered past. His initial work did not erase the house's original identity. Instead, he refined it, smoothing the medieval irregularities while respecting the Tudor proportions. An early photograph captured by William Henry Fox, Talbot shows the house in this transitional state, its Elizabethan character softened by Hopper's subtle Regency enhancements. Hopper's work established a new architectural baseline, preparing the estate for the much more dramatic transformation that would soon follow. By the mid-19th century, a new generation of the Benion family sought to elevate the house further, commissioning the Scottish architect Richard Armstrong. Though less renowned than Hopper, Armstrong possessed a boldness perfectly suited to Victorian sensibilities. His approach was not one of gentle refinement, but confident reconstruction. He preserved the essential E-plan layout of the original house, but nearly everything else was reimagined. Towers rose where chimneys once stood, reshaping the silhouette into a picturesque skyline of turrets, gables, and sharply defined roof lines. These vertical elements served a functional purpose, concealing flues and ventilation systems, but visually they transformed Englefield House into a romanticized version of itself, a place where old-world lineage met industrial age ambition. The interiors experienced an equally dramatic evolution. Armstrong expanded the main rooms, installing intricate plaster ceilings rich with detail, ornamentation, and layered symbolism. Light entered through enlarged mullioned windows, illuminating decorative molding, carved woodwork, and patterned finishes that reflected the Victorian appetite for texture and complexity. The original entrance hall, once modest and practical, was turned into an impressive library complete with relocated Corinthian door cases and a ceiling adorned with botanical motifs and delicate medallions. This library, filled over time with thousands of volumes, became a visual and intellectual centerpiece, radiating the gravitas of a family deeply embedded in public service, philanthropy, and global exploration. Elsewhere in the house, the long gallery, historically a place for walking, conversation, and display, was refitted with thoughtful precision, becoming adaptable for both private gatherings and community functions. The drawing room, initially decorated in exuberant high Victorian polychrome, displayed bold colors and elaborate patterns before being softened decades later into a more refined French-inspired palette. These overlapping design layers spoke to the house's continuous evolution rather than any single architectural moment. Each generation left its mark, contributing to a living interior that reflected the tastes, priorities, and aspirations of its time. Armstrong's transformation was more than architectural, it was psychological. Englefield House now projected strength, continuity, and modernity. It embodied Victorian ideals, respect for heritage paired with an eagerness to innovate. This boldness extended beyond the house itself and flowed naturally into the surrounding landscape. The estate was ready for a horticultural revolution, one that would be as ambitious as the architectural work that preceded it. And so, as Englefield House stood proudly in its reinvented Victorian form, its towers rising against the Berkshire sky, its interiors glowing with new life, the estate turned outward toward the gardens, preparing to reshape the land with the same visionary energy that had transformed the house. The next transformation would unfold not in stone, but in terraces, pathways, and sculpted earth, setting the stage for one of the estate's most enduring masterpieces. By the 1860s, Englefield House had already undergone its great architectural awakening, but it was the land in front of the house that would become the estate's most audacious declaration of power. Victorian Britain was a nation intoxicated by progress and fascinated by the grandeur of continental Europe. And for the Benyon family, now firmly established, financially secure, and culturally ambitious, there was no better way to demonstrate their status than by reshaping the varied landscape into a work of art. To achieve this, they brought in a team of Italian craftsmen whose mastery of stone, geometry, and theatrical landscaping had been refined in the villas and palaces of northern Italy. These artisans arrived in rural Berkshire with techniques unfamiliar to most English gardeners, carrying with them a tradition of terrace design that emphasized drama, precision, and unbroken sightlines. Over the course of years, they carved into the hillside 3 monumental terraces descending from the façade of the house. Each level was meticulously planned, broad platforms edged with stone balustrades, sweeping staircases that guided the eye downward, and axial alignments that framed the house like a temple set above its ceremonial forecourt. The transformation was immediate and astonishing. What had once been a simple slope became an outdoor theater of symmetry and scale. Standing at the top terrace, a visitor could gaze down through a sequence of spaces that unfolded like scenes from a grand opera, formal gardens giving way to borders of flowering shrubs, and then to rolling parkland that dissolved into the distance. From below, the house appeared elevated to a position of almost mythic prominence, as though lifted onto a pedestal crafted by human hands. The terraces did more than enhance the estate. They redefined it, turning the house into the visual climax of a carefully orchestrated landscape. The planting design reinforced this sense of controlled magnificence. Rigid hedges shaped geometric lines across the terraces, creating crisp boundaries that contrasted with bursts of color from roses, delphiniums, salvias, and perennials, chosen as much for texture as for bloom. The interplay between strict structure and natural abundance produced a visual rhythm unique to this estate. Garden observers would later describe the style as an Anglo-Italian fusion, an aesthetic blend that felt at once classical and distinctly English. It was a demonstration of cultural confidence, a message that the estate could absorb influences from abroad without surrendering its identity. Each stone, each urn, each flight of stairs was a testament to wealth deployed with precision. The terraces required not only artistic vision, but enormous labor and expense. Entire teams of gardeners, masons, and engineers worked to shape the earth, install drainage systems, and ensure that the terraces would endure through the seasons. Their work was rewarded. The terraces became the estate's defining feature, a physical embodiment of Victorian ambition carved into the land itself. The impact of this transformation reached beyond aesthetics. These terraces elevated Englefield House from a distinguished country residence into something approaching a rural palace, a place where architecture and landscape merged into a single immersive experience. Visitors arriving at the estate no longer encountered a house simply placed on the land. They encountered a composition, a deliberate arrangement designed to evoke admiration and awe. The double act of Victorian architecture and Italianate landscaping created a unified vision that would carry Englefield into the 20th century with undeniable presence. Yet beneath the grandeur, the terraces also signaled transition. The 19th century was drawing to a close, and the world around Englefield House was changing. Industrialization was reshaping Britain, new global forces were emerging, and the rigid social structure that had supported estates like Englefield for centuries was beginning to soften. The house, now crowned with its extraordinary terraces, stood ready to face this new era, but it would need to evolve again. The path forward would lead into the 20th century, a period of war, reinvention, and environmental thought. And as the Victorian sun set over the freshly carved terraces, Englefield House began preparing for its next metamorphosis. A transformation shaped not by empire or aristocratic ambition, but by the challenges and opportunities of the modern age. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it a world that no longer bowed instinctively to the old order. The foundations of aristocratic Britain, land, inheritance, and inherited authority, were beginning to shift under the weight of new political and economic forces. Heavy taxation targeted large estates. agricultural markets fluctuated, and social attitudes toward privilege evolved rapidly. For many historic houses, this period marked the beginning of irreversible decline. Yet, Englefield House, instead of resisting the changing world, demonstrated an instinct for adaptation that had been quietly building over centuries. The estate's Victorian grandeur, once a symbol of unstoppable ascent, now demanded significant resources simply to maintain. Roofs required constant attention, gardens needed teams of skilled hands, and the intricate interiors, rich with plasterwork, wood carving, and generations of craftsmanship, could not be left to chance. But where other estates faltered, Englefield positioned itself with unusual resilience. It began by expanding its purpose, allowing the estate to become more dynamic than the static country house model of previous eras. This willingness to evolve set the tone for everything that followed. The 1930s brought a major addition to the landscape, a woodland garden crafted by the renowned horticultural firm Wallace & Barr of Tunbridge Wells. The creation of this garden required thinning dense woodland and designing a stream that wound through plantings chosen for seasonal progression. Azaleas, rhododendrons, camellias, and magnolias filled the slopes with color from early spring to midsummer. The garden offered not only beauty, but a new way of interacting with the estate, inviting visitors to experience curated wilderness, in contrast to the formal Italianate terraces below. Much of the original 1936 planting survives, a rare living artifact of early 20th century garden design and a testament to the estate's commitment to long-term stewardship. Though detailed records of World War II activity at Englefield House are limited, it is nearly impossible to imagine an estate of this scale untouched by wartime mobilization. Across the country, great houses served as accommodation for troops, convalescent spaces, administrative hubs, or centers of agricultural production. Fields surrounding Englefield would likely have been folded into national efforts, contributing crops and labor to support a country under strain. Whatever precise role the estate played, it survived the war intact, a remarkable outcome during a decade when many historic properties were damaged, requisitioned, or abandoned. In the post-war years, survival required more than luck. Britain's economic climate placed heavy burdens on landowners, and many country houses were demolished or sold to institutions. Englefield, however, chose an alternative path: diversification. The estate embraced new ways to generate revenue while preserving its essential character. Skilled workers maintained the buildings, woodlands were carefully managed, farms operated with renewed efficiency, and tenant properties created stable income across hundreds of homes and plots of land. These strategies allowed the estate not only to endure, but to modernize without sacrificing heritage. By the 1970s, the Victorian terraces received a sensitive redesign under American landscape architect Lanning Roper, who refreshed planting schemes while respecting the architectural bones created a century earlier. This work signaled that the estate remained committed to evolving gracefully rather than freezing itself in time. The gardens now blended tradition with modern, horticultural ideas, mirroring the estate's broader approach to sustainability and adaptation. As Britain entered the late 20th century, a surprising new opportunity emerged, one that would connect Englefield House to audiences far beyond Berkshire. Its preserved architecture, historically layered interiors, and sweeping landscapes made it an ideal filming location. Location scouts recognized in the estate a rare combination of authenticity and atmospheric depth. Without altering its identity, Englefield House stepped into a new role, a backdrop for stories told on screens around the world. This shift marked the beginning of a new economic model, one rooted not in agriculture or aristocratic inheritance, but in global media. Film crews brought revenue, productions introduced the estate to millions, and the house's image entered popular culture in ways unimaginable to its earliest builders. The adaptability that had carried Englefield House through centuries of upheaval now guided it into a new era, one fueled by creativity, visibility, and cultural relevance. The estate was no longer simply surviving the 20th century, it was preparing to thrive in the 21st, ready to embrace an era of global storytelling where heritage and modernity could coexist in unexpected harmony. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, Englefield House stepped into a role no architect or aristocrat could have imagined when its earliest stones were laid. What had begun as a defensive manor on a Saxon battlefield, then evolved into a Victorian masterpiece, now became something profoundly modern, a cinematic chameleon capable of slipping into identities far removed from its own. Its interiors, preserved, restored, and layered with centuries of craftsmanship, offered an authenticity that no studio set could replicate, and once filmmakers discovered it, Englefield's transition into a global filming icon accelerated with remarkable momentum. Production designers were drawn first to the long gallery, with its uninterrupted expanse of light and proportion. Then came the library, rich with carved detail, and a ceiling patterned in botanical motifs. The drawing room, with its ornamental plasterwork and elegant views over the terraces, soon followed. Each room seemed capable of transforming on command, effortlessly shifting from royal residence to academic institution, from aristocratic salon to shadowy estate filled with intrigue. The house was no longer merely a backdrop. It had become a performer in its own right, capable of assuming characters with the quiet authority of a seasoned actor. Television was the first medium to claim the estate. Englefield House stepped into the role of Sandringham in The Crown, its interiors subtly reshaped by lighting and set design to evoke the royal family's private world. The authenticity of the architecture, the proportions, the textures, the patina of age, allowed the illusion to feel natural. Viewers around the globe watched scenes unfold in rooms they believed belonged to monarchy, unaware that they were glimpsing the private spaces of a Berkshire estate with its own centuries-old story. Film productions soon followed. The house transformed into Charles Xavier's school for gifted youngsters in X-Men, First Class, merging comic book mythology with English heritage in a way few locations could achieve so convincingly. In Cruella, the estate played the intimidating residence of Baroness von Hellman, its dignified interiors reimagined as the stronghold of a fashion magnate. In other productions, it stood in for grand country houses, political estates, or fictional palaces, each role rendered believable by the house's rich architectural vocabulary. Englefield even appeared in music videos, commercials, and promotional campaigns, proving that its aesthetic power extended into every corner of contemporary media. With each new project, the estate expanded its cultural footprint. Its rooms were seen not just by visitors who wandered through garden gates on public Mondays, but by millions of viewers across continents. Scenes filmed beneath its chandeliers or along its staircases became part of collective memory. Emotional moments, climactic reveals, iconic visuals tied to stories entirely separate from Englefield's own history. In this way, the house entered a new form of immortality, not through lineage, but through narrative. It became a building recognized not only for its past, but for its starring roles. This shift also redefined Englefield House as an enterprise. Filming generated revenue that supported conservation, staff salaries, landscape management, and ongoing restoration. The estate's leadership began cultivating relationships with location scouts, understanding that Englefield's future could be shaped as much by creative industries as by agriculture or tenancy. Proximity to new film studios in Shinfield and Arborfield further strengthened these connections, making the estate a prime candidate for productions seeking historical texture paired with logistical convenience. Events soon followed the same trajectory. Rooms designed for Victorian receptions now hosted corporate gatherings, performances, and large-scale celebrations. Outdoor concerts drew thousands, filling the parkland with modern crowds beneath the same skyline once observed by Tudor courtiers and Victorian gardeners. The estate learned to operate not just as a heritage site, but as a diversified organization, flexible, adaptive, and deeply intertwined with the cultural and economic ecosystems of modern Britain. By the time global audiences recognized Englefield House on screen, the estate had already completed its transformation. It was no longer defined solely by its architecture or its aristocratic past. It had become a brand, a cultural asset, a location with global resonance. Its identity expanded beyond its physical boundaries. Every film, series, or advertisement extended the estate's presence into a new realm of storytelling, And standing behind this evolution was a family and management team that understood something critical. A house survives not by resisting change, but by mastering it. The next chapter would reveal just how thoroughly Englefield had embraced this truth, shaping itself into a modern corporation built upon 1,000 years of history. Today, Englefield House stands at the center of an estate so vast and intricately structured that it functions less like a traditional country residence and more like a living organism, an ecosystem sustained by thousands of interconnected parts. Its 14,000 acres extend across West Berkshire in a mosaic of farmland, woodlands, cottages, commercial spaces, and heritage landscapes. Each acre, each building, each enterprise contributes to the estate's pulse, ensuring that this centuries-old property not only survives the pressures of the modern world, but adapts dynamically to it. The estate's scale alone is striking. More than 600 individual properties fall under its management, ranging from centuries-old cottages nestled in ancient villages to storage units, offices, workshops, and small commercial centers spread across nearby towns. What appears at first glance to be a purely rural estate reveals itself as a sophisticated network of real estate assets, each carrying its own financial and operational demands. Long-term tenants form multi-generational bonds with the land, creating continuity that reinforces the estate's identity as both historical anchor and contemporary community. Agriculture remains a foundation of the estate's structure, yet even here Englefield has evolved into something far more complex than a traditional farming operation. Around 2,000 acres are directly managed through partnerships with specialist contractors, producing wheat, barley, and oilseed crops in carefully planned rotations. The remaining farmland is maintained by 23 tenant farmers whose resilience programs, developed into collaboration with the estate, offer training, resources, and long-term stability. This cooperative approach reflects a shift from feudal hierarchy to modern sustainability, with Englefield acting not as a landlord ruling from above, but as an economic partner invested in shared success. And then there are the forests. 3,500 acres of woodlands certified under the Forest Stewardship Council, managed to strict environmental standards. These forests are neither ornamental nor untouched museum pieces. They are active contributors to the estate's economy and ecological goals. Timber harvested here becomes fencing, carpentry materials, and even components for film sets. New plantings support biodiversity, while continuous planting ensures that the woodlands remain productive for generations. The trees surrounding the house may appear timeless, but they are part of a meticulously managed system designed to balance economic output with ecological responsibility. Supporting the estate is a workforce of around 60 professionals, whose trades span everything from horticulture and gamekeeping to stonemasonry and building conservation. Their work is largely invisible to the casual visitor, yet they are the engine room powering the estate's continuity. Skilled bricklayers restore crumbling facades, carpenters repair original window frames, and gardeners maintain landscapes that must look as though they've grown effortlessly for 100 years. This behind-the-scenes activity is constant, methodical, and essential, an ongoing effort to ensure that the house remains functional, safe, and historically coherent. Tourism and events have become equally vital to the estate's economic ecosystem. Public garden openings provide steady income, while offering visitors a connection to the estate's evolving story. Heritage concerts attract thousands, turning the parkland into a cultural venue under open skies. Weddings, corporate gatherings, and charitable events animate the interiors, filling the long gallery and drawing room with new forms of life. And of course, the international film industry continues to draw the world to Englefield, allowing the house to generate income not from agriculture or aristocratic privilege, but from its ability to inhabit new identities on screen. It is this diversification, this willingness to transform, that defines Englefield House today. The estate is neither a relic nor a museum. It is a corporation, a community, an ecological steward, and a cultural icon. Its survival depends not on nostalgia, but on the ability to evolve without losing the essence that makes it extraordinary. Behind its serene facade lies a complex organization with strategic planning, financial oversight, and long-term vision comparable to that of a modern company. And this raises the question that sits quietly at the edge of the estate's story. How can a house built centuries ago, shaped by battles, faith, empire, and reinvention, continue to exist in the 21st century? How does it endure when so many of its contemporaries have vanished? The answer is beginning to reveal itself, but the story is not yet complete. The philosophy guiding Englefield House in the modern era is rooted in an idea that seems almost contradictory to the scale of the estate itself: the belief that no owner truly possesses the house. Members of the Benyon family often describe themselves not as masters of the estate, but as temporary caretakers, passing through a lineage far longer and more powerful than any individual life. This mindset, quiet, humble, and deeply intentional, has become the foundation of Englefield's longevity. It reframes the estate not as a symbol of personal wealth, but as a responsibility, one that must be upheld with discipline, foresight, and respect for generations yet to come. This philosophy of stewardship is not simply an ideal. It is a practical system that governs every decision made on the estate. The land is managed not for short-term gain, but for durability. Woodlands are harvested in carefully measured cycles, ensuring that no generation depletes what the next will need. Tenant relationships are cultivated with the understanding that stability benefits both the families who live on the estate and the estate itself. Even the smallest structural repairs are handled with long-term thinking in mind. A window is not replaced with the cheapest modern substitute. It is restored in a way that preserves the integrity of the original design, acknowledging that future caretakers will inherit the consequences of today's choices. This approach has allowed Englefield House to survive forces that have destroyed countless other estates: the harsh tax regimes of the 20th century, the decline of the aristocratic economy, the pressures of modernization, and the unpredictable demands of contemporary culture have all washed over the estate without eroding its core identity. While many historic houses became fragmented, sold off, or demolished, Englefield adapted by embracing diversification, heritage tourism, ecological planning, and creative industry partnerships. The estate learned to behave like a modern organization without abandoning its historical soul. Yet, the secret to its endurance lies not merely in clever management strategies. It lies in the estate's ability to exist across time without breaking continuity. Englefield House respects its origins without freezing itself in the past. Victorian terraces coexist with 20th century woodlands. Elizabethan façades stand beside modern sustainability initiatives. Ancient battlefields sit quietly beneath the paths used by film crews and gardeners. The estate thrives because it allows itself to evolve while remaining anchored to a steady internal compass, a set of values that prizes continuity over spectacle and longevity over momentary trends. Visitors often sense this balance even if they cannot articulate it. There is a feeling, as one walks the terraces or passes through the long gallery, that the estate has absorbed and harmonized every era it has lived through. The house does not cling to one identity. It incorporates many, creating a layered personality that feels richer with each passing century. It is not a museum frozen in time, but a living body whose cells regenerate while its essence stays the same. This is the real mystery of Englefield House, its ability to remain itself even as it becomes something new again and again. The estate's survival depends on a paradox: preserving tradition by embracing change, and embracing change without discarding tradition. It is an equilibrium so rare that it can appear almost effortless, even though it requires unceasing work, intuition, and devotion. As the estate stands poised between history and the future, the question arises of what truly makes a house like Englefield feel eternal. The answer begins to emerge in the quiet decisions made every day by the people who care for it, by the land that supports it, and by the stories woven into its walls. These elements shape a continuity that outlives individuals, families, and even eras, preparing the estate for the final chapter of its 1,000-year journey. Across the span of 1,000 years, Englefield House has absorbed more lives, conflicts, ambitions, and reinventions than any single family could hold. Its story begins on a field marked by the clash of Saxon and Viking warriors, a landscape that knew violence long before it knew architecture. From that soil rose an early manor built by the Englefield family, whose lineage anchored the estate to medieval England and set its destiny in motion. Through religious upheavals, political conspiracies, royal confiscations, and a dramatic change of ownership, the house transformed again and again, surviving not because it resisted history, but because it allowed history to shape it. Under the Tudors, it became a symbol of rising political influence, hosting conversations that shaped national policy. Under Elizabeth I, it became a trophy seized to demonstrate the monarchy's power. Under the Paulets, it became a refuge for a fallen royalist marquess seeking stability after witnessing the disintegration of the world he defended. Under Richard Benyon, it absorbed the wealth and global perspective of Britain's growing empire, filling its rooms with craftsmanship from India and adopting a new confidence rooted in international influence. That infusion of resources paved the way for the Victorian reinvention that would reshape the house into the striking structure standing today. The 19th century surrounded Englefield with towers, balustrades, ornamental ceilings, and a library suited for a statesman. Italian craftsmen carved terraces that turned the land into an architectural stage, elevating the estate from distinguished residence to grand rural palace. Each improvement reflected a new chapter in English society, the rise of industrial wealth, the blending of cultures, and the Victorian hunger for grandeur expressed through landscape and stone. The 20th century, with its wars, taxation crises, and social transformation, presented trials that unmade countless other estates, but Englefield adapted, adding woodlands, embracing conservation, diversifying its economy, and adjusting its role within the community. No era passed without leaving something behind. New gardens, new purposes, new ways of surviving in a world that often seemed determined to erase the old. Then came the age of global media. Englefield House stepped onto screens across continents, portraying royal palaces, fictional academies, aristocratic homes, and even villainous lairs. Its rooms became familiar to millions who might never know its name, yet instantly recognized its silhouette. Through film and television, the estate found a new way to remain relevant, not by pretending to be something it was not, but by allowing itself to inhabit roles that echoed the complexity of its own past. Today, the estate operates as both corporation and conservation project, balancing commercial enterprise with environmental responsibility. It hosts concerts, supports tenant communities, manages vast woodlands under strict ecological standards, and continues to welcome filmmakers who reinterpret its spaces for new generations. All the while, the family that guides it describes themselves not as owners, but as custodians whose time is temporary compared to the scale of the estate's existence. Seen this way, Englefield House is not just a building, it is a lineage, a living continuity that has outlasted monarchs, empires, wars, and economic revolutions. It has acted as fortress, refuge, political tool, cultural icon, agricultural powerhouse, film set, and ecological steward. It has reflected every era it has lived through, without losing the core identity that holds those eras together. And so, the story of Englefield House ends where it truly begins, on a question that no historian, architect, or landowner can answer with certainty. After surviving invasions, confiscations, reinventions, and global transformations, how many more centuries will this house endure? How many more identities will it assume? What parts of its history remain hidden in archives, forgotten rooms, or whispers passed down through generations? The house stands ready for whatever comes next, its walls holding centuries of secrets, its grounds carrying memory after memory. Its story is far from over. The only question that remains is how long this remarkable estate will continue to evolve, and what mysteries the next 100, 200, or 500 years will reveal to those who walk its terraces and listen closely to what the stones have to say.